There is a moment, and if you have ever loved someone who made you feel like you were always just slightly out of reach, you know exactly the moment I am describing, when something inside you quietly breaks, not dramatically, not with tears or a scene or a final devastating argument, just quietly. Like a thread you have been pulling on for months, finally giving way, and in that moment, without fully planning it, without a strategy or a script, you simply stop. You stop reaching, you stop checking your phone, you stop replaying the last conversation wondering what you did wrong. You stop, and the strangest thing happens in the silence that follows. Something shifts, not in you. You already knew, somewhere deep beneath the hoping, that this was coming. The shift happens in them. And what unfolds inside the mind and the nervous system of someone who suddenly realizes they are no longer being chased is one of the most psychologically revealing processes a human being can go through. Carl Jung once said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. What he understood, long before modern psychology gave us the language to describe it, is that most of us spend our entire lives running from our own reflection, and nothing holds up a mirror quite like being left behind. So, stay with me, because what I am about to share with you is not a revenge fantasy. It is not a manipulation tactic dressed up in soft language. What I want to walk you through is something far more honest and far more powerful than that. I want to show you what actually happens, psychologically, emotionally, at the level of the subconscious mind, when a woman who has been giving and reaching and bending herself towards someone finally reclaims her own gravity. And I want to show you what it means for you, not just for him, for you. Because here is what no one tells you when you are in the middle of it, when you are the one doing all the reaching, all the initiating, all the careful calibrating of your words and your timing and your energy so that you do not seem too much or too available or too needy. When you are living inside that exhausting performance, you believe somewhere beneath the surface that your attention is the thing keeping the connection alive. That if you stop, everything collapses. That without your effort, there is nothing there. And that belief, as painful as it is to hear, is exactly the story he needed you to keep telling yourself. Let me tell you what was actually happening on his side during all of that time. Every time you reached first, something in his subconscious registered it, not consciously, not in a calculated, villainous way. The human psyche is far more subtle and far more unconscious than we like to admit, but something in him noted that the dynamic was stable, that your presence was guaranteed, that he could exist at whatever level of investment felt comfortable to him without risking the loss of you. Jung called this the persona, the carefully maintained outer self, the face we present to the world, and sometimes to ourselves. His persona told him he was simply being authentic, simply being who he was, simply moving at his own pace. His persona did not need to examine whether that pace was leaving you behind. Because you never stopped moving toward him. You closed every distance he created. You smoothed over every silence. You offered reassurance before he even had to wonder if he needed it. And then you stopped. And the persona, without the scaffolding of your pursuit holding it up, began to crack. Here is where it begins, and here is where it becomes important for you to understand what you are actually witnessing, because it is not what most people describe it as. The first thing that happens when you stop chasing someone is not that they immediately miss you. That is the version of the story that feels satisfying, but it is not the full truth. The first thing that happens is that they become confused, not sad, not longing, confused, because the pattern they had unconsciously come to rely on has been interrupted, and the human nervous system, at its most primitive level, is a pattern recognition machine. It does not respond well to broken patterns. When something that was always there, your text, your call, your energy, your availability, suddenly is not, the nervous system registers it as a disruption before the conscious mind can even name what is happening. Think of it like this. Imagine you have been walking the same path every morning for years, the same stones beneath your feet, the same turns, the same familiar sounds. Now, imagine one morning the path simply ends. You do not fall. Nothing dramatic happens. But your body knows, before your mind catches up, that something is wrong. That is what your absence does to someone who had built their emotional routine around your pursuit. It does not announce itself as loss. It announces itself as wrongness. A quiet wrongness that hums beneath everything else. And here is where his shadow begins to move. Jung described the shadow as the part of ourselves we refuse to look at, the desires we call irrational, the fears we call weakness, the needs we dress up as indifference. Every human being carries a shadow self, the emotional truth living beneath the carefully constructed story of who we are. For someone who has been in the comfortable position of being pursued, the shadow carries things like the fear of not being chosen, the terror of being truly seen and found wanting, the deep hunger for connection that he would never admit to out loud, because admitting it would mean admitting he is not as self-sufficient and unbothered as his persona insists. Your pursuit kept all of that safely underground. It kept the shadow quiet, because as long as you were chasing him, he never had to face the question of whether he would choose you. The question was already answered by your behavior. He was chosen. He was wanted. He was the object of someone's consistent longing, and that is a position that feels, on the surface, like power. But it is a borrowed power, a reflected power, and borrowed things, when called back, leave a hollow where they used to be. When you stop chasing, that hollow opens up, and into that hollow, the shadow pours. He begins to feel something he cannot name at first. It surfaces at odd moments, during a quiet evening, in the middle of a conversation with someone else, right before sleep, when the mind drops its daytime defenses, a restlessness, an irritability with no clear source, a vague sense that something is unresolved, unfinished, out of place. He might scroll through his phone without knowing what he is looking for. He might check your profile, not because he has consciously decided to, but because his subconscious is already searching for data, already trying to reassemble the pattern that broke, and then he sees it or doesn't see it, your absence in spaces where your presence used to be. No new message, no reaction, no soft, hopeful reach in his direction. And what the conscious mind wants to call nothing, the subconscious registers as everything. Here is what I need you to understand about this moment, because this is the part that most people either rush past or dress up as something simpler than it is. What he is experiencing right now is not longing in the way romantic stories describe it. It is not a sudden, luminous recognition of your worth, accompanied by a wave of regret and tenderness. Not yet. What he is experiencing first is something far more primal and far less flattering to him. He is experiencing the panic of a self-image under threat. Let me explain what I mean. For as long as you were pursuing him, his sense of himself, his desirability, his value, his quiet confidence that he was someone worth wanting, was partially constructed from your behavior. He may not have known this consciously. He probably did not know this consciously. But the subconscious mind is a builder, and it builds our self-concept from whatever materials are available. Your consistent desire for him was one of those materials. It told him, without words, without declarations, simply through the repetition of your reaching, you are worth pursuing. You are someone who gets chosen. You are desired. When you stop, you do not simply withdraw your attention. You withdraw one of the foundational stones of the story he was telling himself about who he is. And the psyche does not accept that quietly. What rises first is often not grief. It is defensiveness, a subtle internal bristling that he might not even consciously recognize as what it is. He might find himself thinking about your flaws, reminding himself of the reasons he did not fully invest, telling himself the story of why your absence is not actually a loss. It's a relief, it's clarity, it's nothing that needs to be examined too closely. This is the ego defending its structure, the way a body produces inflammation around a wound. The defensiveness is not cruelty, it is protection. It is his psyche trying to maintain integrity in the face of a sudden destabilization. But here is what defenses cannot do. They cannot hold forever. And the more genuine the connection was, even if it was complicated, even if it was unbalanced, even if it was built on unequal investment, the sooner those defenses begin to soften. Because beneath the defensiveness is something he has been carefully, perhaps expertly, avoiding. The truth of how much he actually felt. Jung spoke often about what he called the anima, the feminine principle that lives within the male psyche, the inner image of woman that a man carries and projects onto the women he encounters in his life. When a man is drawn to a particular woman, when her absence affects him at a level that surprises him, it is often because she has activated something in his anima, something deep and internally significant to his own psychological development. And when that woman steps back, when she stops being available as a screen for his projections, he is forced to turn inward and encounter that part of himself directly. That encounter is rarely comfortable. Often it is disorienting, because what he finds when he looks inward is not the composed, self-sufficient man his persona has always presented. What he finds is older, softer, more frightened than that. The boy beneath the man. The wound beneath the armor. The need he has been calling something else for years. And you, simply by removing yourself from the equation, have made that encounter unavoidable. Now, I want to come back to you for a moment, because this entire time, while we have been tracking what is moving through him, I have not forgotten who this story is really for. You, the woman who spent months, maybe years, calibrating herself around someone else's emotional thermostat, the woman who told herself that if she was patient enough, present enough, loving enough, the distance would close. The woman who learned to read silences like weather patterns, who could tell from the length of a reply whether she had said something wrong, who planned her own behavior around managing his comfort while quietly setting her own aside. I want to ask you something directly, and I want you to sit with the answer before you move past it. What did you feel when you finally stopped? Not what you hoped he would feel, not what you imagined might change in him. What did you feel? Because for many women, the moment of stopping is not triumphant. It is not the confident, decisive scene that empowerment content would have you believe it is. It is quieter and stranger than that. It feels, at first, like grief, like the loss of something you were not even sure you had, like the end of a version of yourself, the version that believed if she just tried a little harder, the love she wanted would finally arrive in full. That grief is real. Do not dismiss it. Do not reframe it too quickly into something that feels more powerful and less painful. The reaching you did, even when it was exhausting, even when it was slowly hollowing you out, it came from something true in you. A desire for real connection, a capacity for love that is genuine and generous and deserving of being met. That part of you is not something to be ashamed of. It is not what failed you. What failed you was the misapplication of it, the pouring of that true and generous love into a dynamic that was not designed to hold it. But here is what happens when you reclaim your own attention. Here is what happens inside you. And I think this is the part the other stories forget to tell, because they are too busy tracking his transformation to notice yours. When you stop chasing, a kind of silence descends. And at first, that silence feels like emptiness alongside the memories. The questions begin. Not dramatic questions, quiet ones, arriving at inconvenient times. Did I handle that the way I should have? Was I actually present with her, or was I just there? Did I respond to her the way she deserved? And the most uncomfortable question of all, the one the shadow has been trying to deliver all along. Was I afraid? Was the distance I kept actually about preference, or was it about protection? Did I use her pursuit as a way of staying close without risking the exposure of actually choosing her? These are not questions his conscious mind generates easily. These are shadow questions. Questions that rise from the part of him that exists below performance, below persona, below the story he tells about himself in daylight. And they are relentless because the shadow is patient in a way the ego is not. It has been waiting for exactly this opening, the gap your absence created, and it is not going to waste it. This is the moment Jung described when he wrote about the necessity of meeting one's own darkness, because the person who was the object of his own quiet neglect, the person he kept at exactly the distance that suited him, was not just you, it was also himself. His own capacity for vulnerability, his own need for genuine intimacy beneath the comfortable layers of casual connection, his own longing for something real, something that mattered, something he was too defended to reach toward directly. Your absence has made him reach toward it anyway, involuntarily, because there is nothing left to deflect it onto. He may reach out to you, maybe directly, with something that feels like honesty or tenderness or a vulnerability that surprises both of you, maybe indirectly through a mutual connection or a casual comment online or a sudden reaction to something you post that he would not have offered before. The form it takes is less important than what is underneath it, the movement of a person beginning, however haltingly, to reckon with himself. And here is what I want you to hold on to when that moment arrives. Because it will arrive for many of you. And when it does, there will be a part of you. The part that loved him, the part that hoped, the part that spent so long reaching, that will want to receive it like water after a long drought. That will want to open back up immediately to restore the connection, to return to the warmth of being wanted by the specific person you wanted. I am not telling you not to feel that. Feel it. It is real. It makes sense. But I am asking you to remember something at the same time, to remember who you were before you stopped, the version of you that was slowly fading, slowly accommodating, slowly disappearing into the work of maintaining a connection that was not meeting you halfway. Remember what it cost you. Not to punish him with that memory, not to use it as a wall, but to use it as a compass, a way of orienting yourself toward what is actually true rather than what is simply familiar and warm and easy to return to. Because what has changed is not just the dynamic between you. What has changed is you. The woman who stopped chasing is not the same woman who began it. She has met something in herself that the chasing kept hidden from her. Her own completeness, her own sufficiency, her own capacity to move through the world without needing someone else's pursuit to confirm her worth. That knowledge does not disappear when he comes back into the room, but it can be temporarily muffled by the relief of his return, and so you must hold it consciously. You must carry it with you into whatever comes next and allow it to shape what you accept and what you ask for and what you recognize as love versus what you recognize as the comfortable performance of it. Jung wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. The key word there is both, not one. Not the chaser transformed by finally being still, both. If what unfolds between you and him is real, if it carries the possibility of something genuinely different than what came before, then transformation will need to be visible on both sides, not as a test, not as a negotiation, as a truth. Real love does not require a woman to reduce her gravity so someone else can feel more comfortable in his own orbit. Real love does not ask you to reach constantly across a distance that never closes. Real love arrives in the form of someone who moves toward you, not as performance, not because you stopped reaching and now it is his turn in some emotional game, but because he genuinely wants to be where you are. And here is the final truth I want to leave with you, the one that sits beneath everything else we have explored tonight. The most profound thing your silence did was not change him. The most profound thing it did was return you to yourself. Because while he was inside his unraveling, inside the crack in the persona, the rise of the shadow, the uncomfortable encounter with his own hidden needs, you were doing something equally significant on your side. You were remembering your own weight. The gravity of a woman who knows her own worth is not something that announces itself loudly. It does not need to. It simply exists, and it pulls, and people feel it without always being able to name what they are responding to. When you stop chasing, you do not become cold. You do not become strategic. You do not become unavailable in some calculated way designed to produce a specific response in someone else. You simply become more fully yourself, present to your own life, attentive to your own needs, moved by what actually moves you rather than by the constant work of managing someone else's nearness. And that is not a tactic. That is not a phase. That is not something you do for a few weeks to see if he comes back. That is who you were always meant to be. The woman who knows that love, real love, the kind worth having, does not require her to chase it. It finds her, it recognizes her, it stays, and perhaps the deepest truth of all, the one that Jung understood and spent his life trying to articulate in the language of dreams and symbols and the long mythology of the human heart. The love you were chasing was never fully outside of you. It was always also within you. The warmth, the depth, the capacity for genuine connection that you kept offering to someone who did not always know how to receive it. That is yours. It always was. What you discover in the silence after you stop is that you were never truly incomplete. You were simply pouring yourself outward with both hands, generous to the point of depletion, and calling the emptiness that remained loneliness. It was not loneliness. It was your own self, waiting patiently for you to come home. And now, finally, you have, Lee.